Leonid Ilyich wants to understand this. So for God's sake, they sent his nephew. What else can be done? Later, Yeltsin had an advisor like that, a very serious woman, tall, very stately. She was a sorceress from the shamans. She came from a shamanic lineage. She protected him, looked after him. Then she left. Her name was Jekan Palieva. She came from a family of sorcerers. We met with her. We met and talked. She said, if you have any questions, come to me. Basically, you know how you come to the Kremlin if you have some kind of question. Of course, I would come, talk to someone, interact, but as for coming to Jekan Palieva often, I didn't do that. The world around us is alive. And this living world is heterogeneous and completely uncontrollable by people. But people want to show that they are strong. So the more primitive a person is, the more they try to show that they have power over the living world. The higher a person is in their position and rank, well, I'm talking about the very top, people like Gref. We had people like Abramovich, even Yeltsin, Brezhnev. They all saw the invisible, the non-existent. They believed in laws. Well, karma, and not just karma, but the laws of those beings who are beside us. You remember, Stalin had fortune tellers. They don't tell us about them. They hid these people from us. Who else? Hitler always had this too, right? And we know that they would lock themselves away. Both of them, each in their own quarters, would talk to someone. Both of them. They communicated. Stalin learned from shamans and Hitler learned from shamans too. What did you think, that Stalin was just sitting in exile in Siberia? No. He went to study with shamans. He had excellent conditions there. He had 14-year-old girls there who bore him children. This is the future leader of the people. Stalin still has many children from them to this day. And since it was impossible to hide all of them, they would show you somewhere on Let Them Talk or some other light yellow press programs just to show that supposedly these children do exist, but not in a way that you could really believe in them. So, as you may recall, Stalin had hooves instead of feet. I talked about this in some of my videos, that even the kids at school laughed at him. He showed his hoofed foot to his friend. This was still during his school years. And his friend told everyone else. When he saw it, he was stunned. And he told the others. They came to laugh, pulled off his boot to look at his foot. And then Stalin violently lashed out at that young kid who had supposedly betrayed his trust. And he came incredibly close to actually taking his life. Well, that's how they say it. Almost killed him. We don't really know how it actually happened. Even if he did kill him, they wouldn't tell you about it, because at that time he was still a child. He was either 13 or 14 years old. A teenager of that age. But he had a hoof on his foot. It was not just a simple case of fused toes, but he actually had a fully formed hoof. That is exactly why he was never able to wear any boots with a hard sole, or anything even remotely like that. He wore soft boots. You know, we even had them specially made, all sorts of things like that. But nonsense or truth can be wrapped in grand legends and put on a pedestal, transformed, adorned with wreaths, decorated with flowers, embellished, and then you'll have happiness in the story about Stalin. As for spirits, people have always summoned spirits. I even remember Leonid Ilyich Brezhnev would send his nephew Borya Belyak. He was my first fiancé in Moscow, in Russia. I came to Moscow. He was my first fiancé. I was 19, and Borya was, I think, 41 at the time. And he was sent to the Philippines. And those Filipino shamans were called healers. Well, they still call them that now. It's just that now people in Russia have stopped talking about them. Back then, people started talking about them a lot, because Leonid Ilyich didn't trust anyone. He trusted no one so much that he didn't even trust sending someone from the KGB there. He sent, along with a large commission of military personnel, doctors, and scientists, his own Borya Belyak. And Borya Belyak went there and later told me about what happened there, what they pulled out of people, some kind of guts, some appendages in general. I knew all about this. This was in the 1970s, my friends. Can you imagine how long ago that was? So I was always immersed in this from the very beginning. I didn't see anything particularly special or forbidden about it. Leonid Ilyich wants to understand this. Well, for God's sake, they sent his nephew. What else could they do? Later, Yeltsin had an advisor, a woman, very serious, tall, well, kind of imposing. She was very much a witch and a shaman. She came from a shamanic lineage. She protected him, looked after him, and then she left. Her name was Johann Poli. That was her surname and first name. She was from a family of witches. We met and talked. She said, if you have any questions, come to me. Basically, it's like going to the Kremlin if you have some kind of question. Of course, I would come, talk to someone, interact. But as for visiting Johann Palaev, often I didn't do that. So healers are people who cure others. Why did Brezhnev need them? He wanted to be healed. In my opinion, they had already started poisoning him by then. And not everything was simple with his health, because by then he was no longer needed by Elizaveta. Everything had already happened, and all their love had already run its course. That's why his jaw suddenly... Yes, it seemed to have broken. No one really knew what happened. He started mumbling and speaking in a strange way. Nothing was going right for him, because he had already been written off by Elizaveta's circle of acquaintances, let's say, her friends. He was written off. Elizaveta, Queen Elizabeth II, of course, he was her friend, a dear friend, a long-time friend. Since way back, since their Romanian days, they grew up together. What do you expect? Of course. But why should people know about this? I'm telling you. But so many years have passed, now they're all up in heaven, looking down on us. So healers are people who perform operations with their hands without any intervention. They act as intermediaries between the world of people and spirits and help with healing and magical rituals. These are healers. They also resort to magic and perform magical rituals. My grandfather was a healer. Hussein Sitburhan. I bear his name. Sitburhan. This is my grandfather's name. And back then they still expected a lot of help from him. They invited him to the Kremlin. Nicholas II came. It was 1906. Back then, everyone would gather. The Chinggisids would gather in the Kremlin. They would visit my grandfather. My grandfather lived in Tver. He had already moved to Tver, and they were building a mosque for him on Milionai Street. It was different then. Everything was stripped from it. The golden domes, everything was taken away. It was very expensive stone and gold. Well, now none of that is left. Now it's just some kind of shed, and that's all it is, a shed. Well, what does the proletariat need? The proletariat needs nothing. Drums, fighting, and blood, that's the proletariat. So we started talking about spirits. Spirits, of course, they hear us, they understand. And if you deceive me, for example, let's say I'm speaking, right? You deceive me. But I'm protected by spirits, and not just spirits. The spirit of Fatima Sultan Seytovna, my great-grandmother, protects me. Fatima Sultan Seytovna, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, the Prophet's only daughter. So my last name is Sid Burkan. It comes from the Shiite line. We inherit this from Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad. But that's for those who know. For those who don't, it's pointless to explain. So they protect me. And if someone tries to harm me, if someone deceives me, they get payback without even understanding why they fall ill, why they suddenly get cancer, why everything suddenly falls apart for them. It's because they tried to harm me. They picked the wrong person to mess with. Go after each other instead. Not those who have such protectors. No, that's not allowed. That's why we pray to our ancestors. And I always urge you, pray to your ancestors. I'm not hiding anything from you. I tell you everything you need to do, everything that's necessary. And right now, in the mountains of Switzerland, there are, of course, sorcerers walking around at night, spirits at night. You need to respect them. You need to talk to them when you enter the forest. And as for working for those in power, there are undoubtedly advantages here. Not just for those in power, but for wealthy people as well. For example, for Potanin, for Alpha Bank's freedmen. When they work for them, these people, I'm taking the presidency as the basis, the president as such, he would first and foremost provide an excellent apartment in the very best part of Moscow. That comes first and foremost. Of course, people hold on to this because it's not always possible to get it any other way. A personal car, always a personal driver. Usually that's 2 drivers. They would take turns with each other. A luxury class car. That is also very impressive. The salary. No, first and foremost, the position. A position in the Kremlin. Do you see what kind it was? Advisor. Advisor to the president. No, not just anyone, not just any advisor, but an advisor to the president. So, an apartment, a car, drivers, a position, a respected position, connections throughout the Kremlin, and with people of the highest rank, that is, with business class people who come to the Kremlin, with various matters to discuss. And third, the salaries, the pay. To say that the salary is just high would be an understatement. Of course, it is an exceptionally generous and impressive salary. In fact, it is simply a staggering amount of money. But there is also a whole extensive range of additional benefits provided to such people, individuals like mystical shamans, or perhaps even witches working for the president, or an advisor at Alpha Bank, or perhaps an advisor to Potanin, or even to Abramovich. So, what we see here is a very complex and stratified hierarchy of income. This hierarchy of income is so incredibly high that it is virtually and utterly impossible for an average person to even begin to talk about it. Because these people, the ones who are oligarchs and come to the Kremlin, they were required to allocate a certain portion for upkeep. For the upkeep of the president's advisor, for the upkeep of the president's witch. You understand? And there. Let's say, for example, Berezovsky would give 2 million at a time. A single payment. Over the course of a year, this would happen several times. And in that case, of course, the witch or the advisor has something to hold on to. The level of service for the advisor and the president. It's very high. The advisor serves the president. The president provides the opportunity for the advisor to be served at the highest level. She herself doesn't work, the witch, right? She only fulfills certain wishes of the very same president. But the oligarchs are the ones who work. And these oligarchs, they supply the witch. Of course, people deeply appreciate and hold on to things like that. People truly want to strive and work hard for that. And people sincerely value that kind of positive attitude toward them. That's why probably Johann Polieva didn't really care exactly who Boris Yeltsin really was and what he was actually doing. Given our struggling and far from affluent daily lives, the provision of high-end luxury class goods has a clear advantage and is consistently given the highest priority and preference. I am Tanya Karatsuba Seidbergan. As we look at the calendar, today marks the very first day of the month of February in the year 2026.